Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it operates quietly through zoning laws, loan guarantees, and municipal permits. Sometimes it avoids headlines entirely, and sometimes, by the time it becomes visible, it has already shaped generations. On June 25, 1999, at a medical center on Long Island, one of New York's most influential real estate figures died at the age of 93. Within hours, his children were reviewing a will connected to thousands of apartments, decades of accumulated assets, and a family structure that had been carefully managed and tightly controlled for most of the 20th century. What followed was not unity, it was litigation, disputes over inheritance, allegations of manipulation, and renewed scrutiny of a man who had spent his entire life avoiding attention. His name was Fred Trump. To the public, he was often described simply as the father of Donald Trump. In reality, he was something far more consequential, the architect of the Trump family's wealth, operating almost entirely outside the spotlight. Inheriting structure, not dreams. Fred Trump was born Frederick Chris Trump on October 11, 1905, in the Bronx, New York City. He was born into stability, not luxury, but structure. His father, Frederick Trump, had already completed a rare immigrant trajectory. Arriving from Bavaria as a teenager in the 1880s, he avoided the romantic risks of frontier speculation and instead monetized certainty. During the gold rush era, he did not mine. He sold food, lodging, and services to those who did. By the time Fred was born, the family already owned property in Queens. This matters. Fred Trump did not start from nothing. He inherited capital, land, and, more importantly, a mindset. Avoid volatility, sell necessity, and align with systems larger than yourself. That inheritance would shape every decision he made. Early loss, institutional continuity. In 1918, during the first wave of the global influenza pandemic, Frederick Trump died suddenly at the age of 49. Fred was 12. In many families, that kind of loss would have caused collapse. But Elizabeth Trump, Fred's mother, did not liquidate the business or retreat. She preserved it. She continued managing the family's real estate holdings in Queens, collecting rent, maintaining properties, and keeping the operation intact through one of the most turbulent economic periods in American history. This continuity mattered more than growth. By the time Fred reached adulthood, the family had survived war, pandemic, and recession without losing its footing. The lesson was clear. Durability beats ambition. Learning the trade from the ground up. Fred completed his formal education in 1923 and entered the construction trade immediately. Unlike later narratives that framed him as a pure financier, Fred learned building physically. He worked as a laborer and carpenter. He understood materials, costs, timelines, and margins. The family business operated under the name Elizabeth Trump and Son. Elizabeth controlled finances and oversight. Fred handled construction, sales, and expansion. This division of labor was not symbolic. It created discipline. Projects were built modestly, sold quickly, and profits were reinvested cautiously. Fred did not chase prestige. He built rows of small houses in Queens. Affordable, standardized, repeatable. Scale, not spectacle, defined his approach. Surviving collapse through adaptation. The Wall Street crash of 1929 nearly destroyed the construction industry. Credit evaporated. Demand collapsed. Projects stalled mid-build across the country. Fred Trump did not fight the market. He stepped sideways. Temporarily leaving construction, he opened one of Queens' earliest self-service supermarkets, a concept still novel at the time. Customers selected goods themselves instead of relying on clerks, reducing labor costs and increasing turnover. It was not a passion project, it was a survival strategy. That decision allowed him to preserve capital while competitors failed. By the time construction resumed, Fred was still standing and positioned to move quickly. The government becomes the client. Everything changed in the mid-1930s. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal reshaped the American economy. Through the National Housing Act and the creation of the Federal Housing Administration, the federal government stabilized mortgage markets and subsidized mass housing construction. For builders like Fred Trump, this was not ideology, it was opportunity. Fred aligned his business model perfectly with federal incentives. He did not build luxury housing. He built modest apartments and homes designed to qualify for government-backed financing. Public policy lowered risk. Federal guarantees ensured payment. Scale became viable. Fred Trump's success during this period cannot be separated from government support. This was not corruption. It was alignment. War, scale, and ownership. World War II accelerated Fred Trump's rise dramatically. Federal funds were redirected toward housing for military personnel, particularly near naval installations and shipyards. Fred built thousands of units, especially in Norfolk, Virginia. Here is the critical detail. He was allowed to retain ownership after the war. Many wartime contractors lost control of assets once peace returned. Fred did not. The properties remained his. That decision created decades of steady rental income and transformed wartime construction into permanent wealth. This was not accidental. It was the result of understanding how to operate inside bureaucratic systems and how to remain indispensable to them. Discipline, control, and reputation. Fred Trump avoided publicity almost entirely. He did not court journalists. He did not cultivate celebrity. He worked 6 days a week, monitored expenses obsessively, and maintained direct oversight over operations well into old age. At home, he was authoritarian. In business, uncompromising. He donated generously to hospitals, medical institutions, and Jewish charities, partly out of conviction, partly out of social positioning. Controversy followed him regardless. In 1927, he was briefly arrested during a Ku Klux Klan rally in Queens, though never charged. Later, his housing operations faced allegations of discriminatory practices, including federal lawsuits in the 1970s, accusing the Trump Organization of racial bias in tenant selection. Fred denied wrongdoing. Efficiency, not empathy, defined his reputation. Family, expectation, and failure. Fred and his wife, Mary Ann Trump, raised 5 children. His eldest son, Fred Trump Jr., was initially expected to inherit the business. But Fred Jr. did not fit the mold. He struggled under pressure, resisted the authoritarian structure, and ultimately pursued a career as an airline pilot instead of a developer. The family treated this as failure. Fred Jr. developed alcoholism and died in 1981 at the age of 42, leaving behind 2 children. The loss reshaped the family hierarchy. With the eldest son gone, Fred turned his attention to his second son, Donald. Donald Trump enters the system. Donald Trump joined the family business in 1968 and became president of the Trump Organization in 1971. Public narratives often describe this as a generational handoff. It was not. Fred Trump remained the financial backbone of the operation. He provided loans, guarantees, and credit support that allowed Donald to pursue riskier ventures, particularly in Manhattan real estate and later in Atlantic City casinos. As Donald accumulated debt, Fred intervened repeatedly. Not publicly, quietly. The empire expanded, but it did so on foundations built decades earlier, the quiet architecture of power. Fred Trump was not a visionary. He was not a showman. He did not attempt to reshape culture or capture imagination. He did something far more durable. He aligned with government policy. He monetized stability. He avoided unnecessary risk. He built patiently, repetitively, and quietly. Without Fred Trump, there is no Trump Organization as the world knows it, no Manhattan Towers, no Atlantic City casinos, no political ascent. History often remembers the loudest figure at the end of the chain, but power is usually built earlier, by those who understand systems, not spotlights. Fred Trump was the silent builder, and dynasties rarely begin anywhere else.